Welcome, dear friends. You're on the channel, and this is your daily analytical combat briefing. Before we get into it, and today's material is hot in the most literal sense of the word, a sincere request, please subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit the bell icon. YouTube is systematically suppressing this type of content, pushing analytical military channels into shadow bans. The algorithm simply doesn't show our episodes to subscribers, and without you manually activating notifications, many of you will miss fresh briefings. It takes literally 5 seconds, but it makes a critical difference for the channel. Thank you, and now, let's get to work. And there's plenty of work today. Several fronts, both literally and figuratively, have ignited simultaneously. The Kharkiv direction, Sumy oblast with talk of the regional capital being semi-encircled, the Iran-US confrontation rapidly moving from diplomacy toward open armed conflict, and alongside all of that, the twilight of the petrodollar, a topic now being raised not by conspiracy theorists, but by serious economic players. Let's go through it in order. Kharkiv direction. The quiet front speaks up. Let's start with news that caught many people off guard. Though frankly, it shouldn't have. Russian forces on the Kharkiv section of the front have breached the state border and seized the settlement of Vetranoye. Combat footage from inside the settlement has appeared online, the Russian flag has been raised, and according to available information, Vetranoye is now fully under Russian army control. Why does this matter? Because the Kharkiv section of the front had been among the quietest for a very long time. This direction seemed to be dormant while the main action unfolded along the Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Sumy directions. And now, an awakening. Russian command has apparently made the decision to activate this sector, and that decision fits logically into the broader strategy of stretching and grinding down Ukrainian reserves. Now for the most important detail in this context. From the Russian border to Kharkiv, Ukraine's second-largest city, is just 35 kilometers. In the scale of this war, that distance is by no means insurmountable. Ukrainian command under Syrsky will be forced to respond and redirect forces here. And forces, as we all understand, are not elastic. Every battalion redirected to Kharkiv is a battalion pulled from somewhere else. And that is where Kyiv's real strategic puzzle begins. Whether Russian forces will continue to press on the Kharkiv direction and push further south will become clear in the coming weeks. But the very fact of activation on this section already tells us that Russian command is operating systematically, running not just frontal pressure, but a multi-vector campaign designed to force the enemy to scatter its resources. Sumy oblast, panic, semi-encirclement, and cold analysis. Now, arguably the defining topic of the current week in terms of information noise. Ukrainian military media has been in a state of genuine agitation for the past several days. And the source of their anxiety is Sumy oblast, and the threat of the regional capital, the city of Sumy, being semi-encircled. Let's break it down calmly and substantively. How real is this threat? Where did it come from, and what lies behind it? Not so long ago, all activity from the North Forces grouping was concentrated on what's known as the main Sumy bridgehead. The offensive axis the Russian army began building out as far back as May of last year. That offensive lasted roughly a month and a half, running through to mid-June, after which Ukrainian command redirected significant reserves here. The Russian advance halted, and the front effectively froze. The Ukrainian armed forces even managed to launch counterattacks and push back Russian positions. However, everything they reclaimed was eventually retaken by Russian forces in the months that followed. A relative equilibrium formed, and this section faded to the background. Everything changed in March of this year. That was when the North grouping began building an entirely new bridgehead for an offensive on Sumy, this time from the east. Kharkiv was taken first, followed by a number of other settlements. In April, the pressure intensified noticeably. Russian forces have now advanced 6,007 kilometers from the border, and the total area of the bridgehead, including the grey zone, is approaching 200 square kilometers. At first glance, so what? 7 kilometers from the border, with 30 more to go before Sumy. Where's the panic? But Ukrainian military analysts are not panicking without reason. Their concern has a very specific and rational basis. This is not about the threat of an immediate assault on Sumy. Nobody is seriously suggesting that. This is about the potential semi-encirclement of the city, and that is a fundamentally different situation. Let's be precise, Sumy is already under pressure from the north. Russian forces have taken Mala-Korchakovka. Fighting is ongoing directly for Korchakovka itself, and once it falls, the path opens towards Sumy forest. And from there to the city's outskirts is already a short distance. According to current data, from the northern direction, Russian forces are roughly 15 kilometers from Sumy. That section has also seen notable intensification over the past 2 weeks. Now add the eastern direction, which has only just begun to unfold. Russian forces have already encircled Ryaznoye from the south and east. The fall of that settlement in the near term appears virtually inevitable. An entry into Tarotutino has been confirmed, and fighting continues in Novodmitrivka. Projecting the current dynamics forward by a month to 6 weeks, roughly mid to late May, the front line on the eastern vector could shift 8 to 10 kilometers deeper into Sumy Oblast. But the true key to the situation is Krasnopilia. Taking this district center would represent a 17-kilometer penetration, already a very serious figure. More importantly, from Krasnopilia, 2 strategically significant operational axes open up: a direct road route towards Sumy and a western vector leading toward the Veliki Bobrik area. That is the point at which Sumy would genuinely find itself in semi-encirclement, pressed from the north and blocked or under threat of blocking from the east and southeast simultaneously. This is still a scenario, not a fait accompli. But the very fact that Syrski is being forced to respond by redirecting additional forces to 2 separate hot zones simultaneously, the Krasnopilia district and the Vovchansk section near Kharkiv, already says a great deal. The North grouping is executing its strategic task brilliantly, and that task may well be its primary one, diverting, overloading, and stretching Ukrainian reserves. And if forces are being pulled from one section, other sections are being left exposed. The analytical position on this question remains unchanged since the beginning of the year. There will be no capture of Sumy in 2026. The semi-encirclement that Ukrainian media is loudly warning about is also unlikely this year. But what is more than likely is the systematic improvement of the North grouping's positions during the spring-summer campaign, and the gradual transformation of the Sumy direction into a genuine strategic threat with a 2027 horizon. If by autumn Russian forces reach Vakalivshchina, and from there to the city is less than 12 kilometers, command will have solid grounds for serious planning in the year that follows. The Belarusian front, myth, reality, and the question of true motives. Ukrainian officials and pro-government media have been aggressively pushing a narrative in recent days, claiming that Belarus is seriously preparing to open a new front. Let's examine that claim the way it deserves, coldly and with numbers. Let's take the most realistic scenario. Belarusian armed forces decide to enter the conflict. Direction: either toward Kiev again or toward Chernihiv. Question: with what forces? The entire Belarusian army numbers roughly 70,000 servicemen. That is comparable to a single Russian forces grouping. Obviously, nobody is going to throw an entire army into an offensive without a single soldier in reserve. That runs contrary to any military logic. Even if we assume Lukashenko committed 20,000 troops, what then? March on Kiev? From the Belarusian border to Bucha and Irpin is over 100 kilometers. The entire border zone is mined. The East grouping advanced roughly 50 kilometers over the entire course of last year, and that was with several tens of thousands of troops engaged. 20,000 men could not reach even Chernihiv within any reasonable time frame. The only scenario in which opening a Belarusian direction would carry genuine military logic would be a new Russian mobilization wave on the scale of 2022. 300,000 men, specifically formed and directed for a thrust through Belarus. That scenario, with proper resource backing, could genuinely create a threat that Ukraine, given its current mobilization capacity, would be unable to neutralize in short order. But, and this is the key point, Russia has parliamentary elections in the autumn. In that political context, announcing a new mobilization wave is extremely unlikely. Conclusion: There will be no Belarusian front in the foreseeable future. Neither Minsk nor Moscow has the necessary resources for it in the current configuration. Which raises the logical question, why is the Ukrainian side pushing this narrative so insistently? The theory worth considering is this. It is possible that this information campaign is designed to create propagandistic justification for Ukrainian drone strikes against Belarusian territory. The logic is straightforward. First, construct the image of Belarus as an aggressor preparing to attack, then present the actual strikes as preventive self-defense. No other coherent explanation for why this manifestly militarily unsound narrative is being amplified has yet presented itself. That said, leave your own read on it in the comments. This is a debatable topic. Precision work. Strike on the Ukrainian defense minister's advisor. One episode warrants separate attention, as it may signal a qualitative shift in Russian tactics regarding target selection. Serhiy Beskresnov, known by the call sign Flash and serving as an advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, publicly stated that he became the target of a deliberate strike last night. A guided loitering munition of the Geran type struck the advisor's private residence. By his own account, he miraculously survived, albeit with injuries. The house itself was completely destroyed. Who is Beskresnov, and why is this strike significant? This man is far from an ordinary bureaucrat. He possesses an extensive horizontal network of connections throughout Ukraine's armed forces and is directly involved in implementing and coordinating electronic intelligence and electronic warfare systems along the entire front line. In plain terms, he is someone who tangibly affects the effectiveness of Ukrainian EW capability and therefore affects the survivability of Ukrainian drones and the capacity to counter Russian strike systems. His elimination, if that was indeed the intent, would have inflicted very specific operational damage. If this practice of targeted strikes against high-level advisors and specialists who influence Ukrainian combat effectiveness becomes a pattern, it represents an entirely new dimension to this war. A strike on the home of a defense minister's advisor is also an unmistakable signal to leadership in Kiev. No one is untouchable. The Iran-US crisis, on the threshold of a major war. And now, for something that in terms of the scale of potential consequences may overshadow everything happening on the Ukrainian front. The Middle East is once again teetering on the edge of full-scale war, and this time it is more serious than at any point since the current escalation began. Donald Trump set a deadline several days ago. If Iran does not accept the American side's terms for negotiations by April 22nd, that is, effectively today, strikes on Iran will resume. The conditions proposed by Washington are characterized by the Iranian side as nothing short of capitulation. Against that backdrop, Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghei, published an unambiguous statement. There are no plans for a next round of negotiations. The negotiation process has effectively collapsed. According to information that has surfaced in American media citing military sources, U.S. forces in the region are at full combat readiness and are awaiting only the appropriate order. The strike could follow within hours. Concrete military clashes are unfolding in parallel. A U.S. Navy destroyer opened fire with its deck gun on the Iranian cargo vessel Tusker in the Gulf of Oman. The ship was en route from China to Iran. The target of the fire was the engine room, a classic immobilization tactic rather than an outright sinking attempt. After the vessel was stopped, a force recon unit from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit boarded the ship. Iran responded immediately. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps conducted drone strikes against American warships in the area of the incident. Tehran had long and publicly forewarned. Any action by the American side would receive a mirror response. The warning has been carried out. Simultaneously, the IRGC announced the complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz. Any vessel or tanker transiting this strategically vital route without Iranian authorization will face forceful measures. This is not rhetoric, it is a declaration of a naval blockade in response to the American blockade. Market reaction was immediate and predictable. Brent crude gained nearly 8%, largely recovering from its previous decline. European natural gas rose approximately 11%. And this is only the initial reaction. In the event of full-scale hostilities and a sustained Hormuz blockage, the price movements could prove considerably more dramatic. Drones versus missiles, the asymmetry that is changing the world. In this context, analysis appearing in authoritative American publications is particularly instructive. The subject is the economic and military asymmetry that Iran is exploiting with striking effectiveness. Manufacturing a single Iranian Shahed 136 loitering munition costs approximately $20,000 to $50,000. A Patriot surface-to-air missile costs $8 million. The ratio, 1 to 200, 1 to 400. To intercept a single inexpensive Iranian drone, the United States is forced to expend a missile worth 160 to 400 times more. At scale and with mass employment, this tactic effectively becomes a machine for destroying American defense budgets. This asymmetry is not accidental. It is the product of the post-Cold War paradigm that shaped American defense planning. A paradigm oriented toward few in number, but highly precise and extremely fast threats. Ballistic missiles, high-speed cruise missiles. The paradigm of massed strikes by relatively slow, cheap, and easily manufactured platforms simply did not fit that worldview. Now it does. And American strategists are being forced to acknowledge Iran has proven a far more difficult and sophisticated adversary than anticipated. The twilight of the petrodollar, a systemic break on the horizon. And finally, what may prove to be the most far-reaching long-term consequence of the current escalation. The subject is the petrodollar, the system that has underwritten the global dominance of the American currency for more than 5 decades. While the Hormuz crisis continues, signals are emerging from the UAE that would have seemed unthinkable just a few months ago. Emirati authorities are signaling that in the event of a deepening crisis and a shortage of dollar liquidity, they may be compelled to shift to yuan or other currencies for oil trade settlements. Official Abu Dhabi is speaking of negotiations with Washington over possible financial support, citing the threat of reserve depletion and investor outflows. And it states directly, America's decision to become entangled in a conflict with Iran has drawn the Emirates into a confrontation with unpredictable consequences. The UAE accounts for more than a fifth of global oil trade. If this player begins de facto shifting its settlements from the dollar to the yuan or other currencies, that is not merely news for financial markets. It is a systemic shift capable of becoming the final link in a chain that has been slowly but steadily unraveling for years. The de-dollarization of global trade has been a gradual process, but it is precisely moments like this that can transform the gradual into the rapid. For Trump personally, and for the United States as a whole, this would be perhaps the most painful of all possible consequences of the Middle Eastern crisis. Ukrainian negotiations, the forgotten topic. And finally, a brief observation that is itself quite telling. At the beginning of this year, the topic of Russian-Ukrainian negotiations was an active presence in the information agenda. Now virtually no one mentions it. The spring-summer campaign has begun, both sides are intensifying pressure, and there is no reason to expect any genuine negotiating effort before autumn. This is precisely the scenario outlined in January's analysis of the year's prospects. The forecast is, unfortunately, proving accurate. That concludes today's briefing. The situation is developing rapidly, particularly on the Iranian front, where within the next 24 hours something may occur that fundamentally reshapes the Middle Eastern theater. Keep following the updates, don't miss the episodes, and once more, your subscription and the bell notification keep the channel visible to you against the backdrop of algorithmic restrictions. Thank you for being with us. Until the next briefing, take care of yourselves and see you very soon.